Hey, Dirty South people. I guess, probably a final wrap up of the questions that we had for the week starting April 13th. We had been finishing a unit on Southern foodways with, uh, interestingly enough, a text I think that sparked a lot more conversations about the content of it outside of foodways than it did in thinking about food, which is totally understandable because Keenan's book is so spellbinding and so magnificent that a lot of the discussion was talking about Horace's inability to reconcile all these multiple points of identity that end up haunting him and ultimately sort of bifurcating him, which is, one of the real true compelling parts of that novel. And when I teach it, I generally teach it in a class that's in concert with some kind of Southern identity or some kind of notion of queerness or queer identity. And so generally that's what we're focusing on. I chose it for this class because, well, first of all, I love Randall Keenan and I love that novel quite a bit. But also for those two sections that bookend the novel, the first one being that ode to hog killing, and then the second being the requiem for tobacco. And a lot of you wrote about some of this. In fact, in the respondent piece, Abby and then later Mega talked about the way that narration moves from third person or first person to second person, as in talking to us as readers, saying, you remember this, you know what this was like, you were present at this. And I think it's a really powerful way in which these notions of foodways, which are, again, Andy was talking about this in his response to Eating Alabama, are more cultural than historical, probably, right? Southern food may have had these emphasis on different kinds of ingredients or different kinds of grains or different ways of cooking or manners of cooking, and yet the way in which we have reified them says more about what Southern culture is than what was historical about Southern foodways. But what I like about this Keenan text, and Keenan is really obsessed with food. In fact, his most recent edited collection I think it's called The Carolina Table, and it's about food and food writing in North Carolina writers. He's one of those authors that subscribes to the belief that if you tell someone, if you're writing a novel and you tell your readers that someone's eating, but you don't tell them what they're eating, then that is that's a violation of a code. He wants to tell you what they're eating. But what's powerful about these two sections, and I think they tie into a lot of what you're talking about with identity and Horace, is that there is the notion that these cultural texts that somehow narrate a connection that we have to region haunts us and won't let us go, and we are haunted by them. And whether that is something like barbecue, which is this hotly contested cultural integer in the equation of what it means to be a Southerner. I come from Memphis, so that's certainly a part of my upbringing, is the primacy of Memphis barbecue versus North Carolina barbecue versus whatever the hell South Carolina barbecue is with its mustard. That there's a notion that these things haunt us and that they're given to us. And I tried to make this a little bit more legible in my response. I don't know how well I did, but that these things continue to haunt us even though they're not something that we chose. We're from the South, so of course we're going to be eating barbecue. Of course we're going to be eating this kind of soul food. And the more that I write about Outkast and some of this dirty South hip hop, the more I find that those lyrics absolutely saturated with the imagery of soul food and the imagery of food. At one point in the title song of their first album, Andre 3000 says, like collard greens and hoe cakes, I've got soul, that's something you ain't got. And that is, I think, quintessentially sort of a good sum up of this meditation, this deep dive on Southern foodways, is that it offers us a way in which to express our connection to region, which might be something we choose. Grace certainly chooses that in Eating Alabama. But it feels historic. It feels like there's some there. And what is that? Why does it feel that way? The chapter that I'm writing is really about the rise of Cracker Barrel. And the question that I'm asking in that chapter is, how did this become Southern food, right? What the invention, Michael Kraling has a book called Inventing Southern Literature. I want to think in that chapter about inventing Southern food, because the kind of food that you would get at a Cracker Barrel really has no historical, and honestly any kind of historical cultural connection to this region, or someone like Paula Deen, or the foodways that are celebrated as being primarily Southern, like Mickler's white trash cooking. And so what is it then about Southern cooking that gives us an opportunity to be haunted by a history and a culture, but then also claim a kind of exceptionalism? And it doesn't have to be, this is the whole thing with Dirty South, right? It doesn't have to be an exceptionalism that is based on something being spectacular or something exceeding expectations. It's an exceptionalism of difference, and that difference is contested. And Southern cuisine is certainly contested. You wouldn't, for example, say to your significant other, I'm going to take you out somewhere special tonight. I'm going to take you to the Cracker Barrel. Or in a certain class, maybe that's something that is differently articulated. I'm not really even interested in these class-based ideas or an economy of class differences. What I am interested in is the way in which that noun, or that, what would this be? That kind of heuristic of Southern food. Why that heuristic then of Southern food becomes another kind of performance, another kind of set of identity fantasies that we subscribe to. And I think, like most of the things in Dirty South, it's a fantasy of identity that we describe to primarily because it is dirty, primarily because it is contested. And what Keenan does with those two sections is to almost literalize the haunting of that, the way in which these things operate on us. You may have never been to a hog killing. You may have never been to a pig picking, which, Jesus Christ, I had to go to when I was my first year at UNC, and it was horrific. But yet, because you identify in these ways, you have been there. You should remember these things. These things are still a part of your cultural DNA for whatever that means. And so these requiems really do kind of tie in all of the other beautiful meditations that Keenan has about identity, whether that's a relationship to sexuality, a relationship to race, a relationship to region or class or town. I mean, Timms Creek is in and of itself a connection that Horace feels above and beyond any kind of connection to state or region. And that these things have a way of haunting you. They have a way of possessing you, that they possess you and you are possessed by them. And sometimes they make you act in ways that you don't understand. Why am I eating this food? What is my connection to this food? Why is this something that narrates a part of my identity that I find useful or I find valuable? And I just want to be at pains throughout all of these things when we find those things, whether it's music, whether it's foodways, whether it's in the kind of films that we watch or the kind of things that we consume, that it's interesting to me that every time we get to those fantasies of identity or these kinds of fantasies of consumption, or the ways that we consume things, that we seem to be drawn to these regional identities that are fundamentally dirty. And I think in an age, in a global age in which cuisine is so, Andy also mentioned this in his discussion of the documentaries, and I would add to that the documentary of Hale County this evening, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, which was nominated for an Oscar, certainly shot in Hale County, Alabama, but not celebrated as a Southern documentary in the way that maybe Eating Alabama would be, but as sort of a profound statement on African American rural experience. And that's something that we've got to grapple with, because what does it mean to be simultaneously related to this region and then related to other markers of identity? And it's not an academic question. I mean, I think Keenan's book quite clearly shows that there are actual consequences, that these have body counts, that when you decide that there are two things that are not in concert with each other and that cannot be reconciled, then you have the potential to really ruin lives and to wreck entire histories, personal histories, not just wreck them, but erase them, as Horace's history gets almost erased. The only one left at the end of that novel to speak for Horace is himself. He's the one to say, I remember me, because how he is going to be remembered is going to be completely contested by a congregation, by a family, by a region, by a town. So great discussion as always. I'm really enjoying reading your comments, and we're going to move a little bit into kind of a meta meditation on the state of the field. I've included some of the major figures of Southern studies just to kind of give you a sense of what their conversations are about the field, and I've very sadly included my own meditation on the field, not because I belong with those luminaries in any way, I certainly don't, but I do want you to see where I'm situating this book that's coming out, which has been sort of the run of the class, right? There was a big explosion of manifestos among Southern scholars around the time that I started this book, and I wanted to situate myself. So there's a sort of a manifesto that I published as the special issue of South, which you guys will also read for this week. So I'm excited to read your comments about the field and the stuff that you're reading. I'm excited to read your final projects. I'll be looking at those on Friday and communicating with you that way. But I hope everybody's staying safe. I'm sending you so much love, so many good thoughts. Please write me if you need anything. It's very helpful and sustaining to be able to reach out to you and to see your awesome comments. So thanks so much for that. Okay, see ya.